Hey everybody, what's up? It's Chase. Welcome to another episode of the Chase Jarvis Live Show here on Creative Live. You know this show. This is where I sit down with amazing humans and I unpack their brains, do everything I can to help you live your dreams in career, in hobby, and in life. My guest today is a lifelong entrepreneur. He is the COO, the Chief Operating Officer of the most badass company that I was probably friends with the earliest, Shopify. My guest is Harley Finkelstein.
Hey guys.
What's up,
So great to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
How many years in the making?
Long time. You've been trying to get me on the show for a long time.
Two years at least.
But we first, I think we met each other 5 years ago through the Build a Business competition.
Yep.
Which was really fun.
That was incredible. And that was, you had like 100 employees then, I think 90 or 60.
Something like 60, yeah. Now we have more than 3,000. So it's been quite the journey.
So that's obviously one of the things I want to talk about today. Our origin story would be fun to trace back because I think the Build a Business competition, which you launched with a bunch of peers and friends of ours, that mutual acquaintances. I do want to talk about that, but I want to talk about the way back. Most of the folks who I know who've built, what's it like? I don't know what your market cap is, 15 billion or some crazy. Okay, well, 60 employees, now $15 billion market cap, publicly traded company out of Ottawa.
Out of Ottawa, Canada. Yeah.
Canada. But I don't know your entrepreneurial journey. So I'm saving it for this very moment. Wow. There's no research because I know that most people who have built businesses like you have had this entrepreneurial like vein. Something like goes way back to their childhood where they were like washing cars or selling crawdads or selling golf balls, which I used to like watch golfers hit the ball into the water. I'd go get it and sell it back to them for like $5.
That's a dangerous sport though.
Well, look at me.
Yeah, I know. You got hit in the head a couple times.
Plenty of times. So what's your entrepreneurial journey? Because you know the show really well. I don't need to explain it to you.
Yeah, so my journey kind of starts back when I was 13 years old. I grew up in a sort of suburb of Montreal in Canada. And around 13 years old, you start going to bar mitzvahs. Mm-hmm. My friends, my Jewish school friends all had bar mitzvahs. And I remember seeing these DJs at these bar mitzvahs. And to me, they were just the coolest people in the whole world. They had the headphones on and they were mixing and they were dancing and it looked like a lot of fun. And so I decided I want to be a DJ. And the problem was I had absolutely no skills. I'm still pretty short, but I was like 4'0" at the time. And YouTube wasn't around, so I couldn't teach myself how to DJ. But anyways, I started calling around and seeing if someone would hire me. And it turned out no one's gonna hire a 13-year-old DJ with no DJ skills. And so
not in hot demand.
It just wasn't gonna happen. And so I decided I would start my own DJ company and hire myself. And that was it. I just kind of decided it. My dad actually, who's always been supportive with all my crazy ideas, went out and made me business cards, which gave me this great validation that maybe I could do this thing. And I went and bought some DJ equipment and taught myself how to beat mix, just counting beats 1 to 8 and figuring out how to fade and just kind of the basics of DJing.
Did you go to the library?
I did not. I didn't go to the library. I just kind of bought this equipment in my basement and just figured stuff out. And again, I had to buy a lot of CDs because obviously that was the only way to do it. There was no Serato then or digital music. But I bought all this stuff and borrowed money from my parents. And actually, my dad was great because he lent me the money. It wasn't much money. It was like $500 or $600. But he taught me about interest. He's like, all right, well, I'm going to lend you this money, but on a weekly basis, I'm going to come back and collect the interest that you owe me. And eventually, you're going to pay back the principal. And so it was a great lesson for me in finance. But I ended up teaching myself how to DJ and then going around the neighborhood and trying to convince neighbors to let me DJ bar mitzvahs and birthday parties and weddings and barbecues. And ended up doing like 500 parties between like 13 years old and 17 years old. And by the time I was 17,
that's 100 a year.
It's a lot, yeah. And
every
I
weekend, both like he had the 9 o'clock show, the midnight show.
And I was in school. I was in high school, right? I was a kid, and I ended up doing a lot of these parties and actually falling in love with the business side of the business, not necessarily the DJ, the art side of it. Mm-hmm. A couple things I learned then was learning how to read the crowd. Yeah. Right. Like just because I want to play hip hop, I know those guys want to listen to disco. I'm going to play disco. Also, making sure that the client loved me before the party started was this easy way to ensure things went well. My sort of philosophy was if they loved me before the party, no matter how the party goes, it's going to be good. right? Just making sure creating a good vibe, good energy with the clients. And that was kind of my first journey into entrepreneurship. And I'm still known to embarrassingly DJ some Shopify Christmas parties to this day.
Yes.
Although last year my wife said, all right, this is it. You're not cool anymore.
That's right. There's 3,000 people. They actually want to have a good time.
Yeah, and it's kind of embarrassing to have some old dude doesn't really know good new music and stuff.
Like, what's the cool stuff?
Yeah. So that was it for me. Yeah.
Well, it's a very common thread for people who've been in the show, and there's been some whoppers like you've built something from nothing, and that's a really common thread, that there's this early sort of makings of a business person, or entrepreneur, or a creator. Where did you get it?
Yeah.
So do you attribute it to anything in particular? Was it your parents particularly entrepreneurial, or?
Not really. I mean, my dad was an entrepreneur, not a particularly good one at that, but. In the same way, so entrepreneurship solved the problem that I had, which was I wanted to be a DJ and no one would hire me. And so I used entrepreneurship to solve my problem. And that was like in 94 or something like that, or 1995. But if you go back to like 1957, my grandparents came to Canada from Hungary. It was the Hungarian Revolution. Canada had let in like 40,000 immigrants. And my grandfather had a problem, which was he had to survive. He had to put food on the table. He had no money, no education. He didn't speak English. And so he started selling eggs at a farmer's market. And I think in some ways, in the same way that he used entrepreneurship to solve his problem, which was frankly poverty, and I used it to solve my problem, which was this passion for entrepreneurship, this passion for DJing, I always sort of assumed that entrepreneurship may be this thing, this catalyst to problem solve.
Yeah.
And actually, a couple years after that, I was an undergrad. I was in college. It was 2001. I went to McGill, University of Montreal, and my dad wasn't able to support me anymore. And I found myself in another problem, which was I either had to move back to live with my parents, and they were living in South Florida at the time, or stay in Montreal and support myself and kind of take care of my tuition. And ended up building a t-shirt business then. And so once again, entrepreneurship was the solution to my problem. In this case, it wasn't this passion for DJing and not being able to get hired. It was, I need to make money, and I needed to do it concurrently while being in class. And so I spent 4 years of my undergrad and college years studying a little bit, but really building this t-shirt business and making t-shirts for about 50 universities across Canada. And again, it was another reminder that my life's work, no matter what I'm gonna do, will involve entrepreneurship in some way.
Well, there's the theme then you've presented that very clearly is solving problems. And now I'm going to fast forward to today, which is, I think if you've been living under a rock and you don't know what Shopify is, it's a company that basically I'll let you explain it. I was going to do it. You explain what Shopify is.
I was actually curious to hear how you could explain it, but I'll take the layup there. Yeah. So the roots of the company is that back in 2004, we were trying to sell snowboards on the internet. And in 2004, there was basically two ways to sell a product online. One way was you paid $1 million to have some custom enterprise solution built. And that's what Walmart did and all the big companies like that did. And the other way was you would sell on a marketplace like Amazon or eBay or Etsy. Yeah. And the first option was too expensive. And the second option, although it was less expensive, it didn't really allow you to build your own brand.
Yeah.
And so
you were someone else's mark.
You were renting customers effectively from the marketplace. And and that's right. And in actuality, the success of your business was tied to someone else's interest in helping you. And so this really, really smart programmer named Toby, who our CEO and founder, Toby decided that he wanted to sell snowboards online and didn't find any good software. And so he wrote this piece of software to sell these snowboards. And within a matter of a year or so, he started realizing that there are people out there like me who wanted to use the software to sell their own products. And he decided by 2005 that snowboards was maybe a good idea, but the software behind the online snowboard business was a great idea.
It's like during a gold rush, sell access.
Sell the picks, exactly. That's right. Yeah, or actually Levi's jeans. That's how they started, right, during the gold rush as well. And so we basically spent the next, up until probably around 2013, becoming what I think is the leader in helping small businesses build great online stores. And we had tens of thousands or maybe even 100,000 stores up until that point use us to build great online businesses. And really the tenets were make it really easy. So if you know how to use email, you can build a store on Shopify within like an hour, make it super scalable, make it easy to customize. And that really was the core of the business. And by 2013, it dawned on us that if we want to be relevant as retail and commerce develops, we have to sort of rethink what is the value that Shopify provides to our merchants. And it looked like the future of retail wasn't going to be necessarily just online, nor was it going to be offline, that maybe the future of retail is going to be retail everywhere. And if we want to be a company that continues to lead in commerce and retail, we have to provide a product that allows entrepreneurs and small business to sell everywhere they want. Online, offline, on Facebook, on Instagram, on marketplaces. And that's kind of what we've been working on to date. And
how many years in?
So now it's been about 13 years or so, 14 years or so since we're working on this thing. And we have more than 600,000 stores. And the interesting part is, even though Shopify was always built for small businesses, and still that's who we care most about.
Yeah.
We've seen companies like Procter & Gamble and Unilever and PepsiCo and Kanye and Kylie and Drake and all these big brands all build stores on Shopify. And what's fascinating is that we're seeing now some of these larger companies beginning to act really entrepreneurial. But these 600,000 stores or so on our platform, they've sold more than $60 billion on Shopify. And if you've bought a really great product that you actually love in the last little while online, and the experience was amazing, there's a really good chance that was Shopify store.
It's true, and that's like not blowing smoke. Like, it is a legit product. It is beautiful. It is fast. The back end is like we are one of those folks at Creative Live. We built our store from the ground up. Only because we had a bunch of nuances to our platform. But obviously we're a community of tens of millions of creators, and Spotify is far and away the leading platform for
Shopify,
everybody.
Not Spotify.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
Shopify.
Spotify is great too.
They're amazing.
Yeah,
but Shopify is the leading purveyor of the store.
Yeah, thanks for saying
that. And so one of the things, there's a handful of ways I want to take this now. So put a pin in how awesome Shopify is and what it stands for. How did you decide that SMB, or like this market of independent creators and entrepreneurs and watchmakers, and like when I did the Build the Business competition with you guys, we'll go there in a second. I was just shocked at the variety of types of people who are selling stuff on your platform. It seems like but there's still a target. You're not for everybody. That's because right. As soon as you try and build something for everybody, you build it for nobody. Who do you serve? How did you choose them? Was it default? Because, honestly, when I look at the entrepreneurial landscape, this is one of the biggest problems I see is people don't know who to build stuff for. Yeah. I like people to solve a problem that they have, because chances are there are other people who have that problem. But how are you focusing on so you've got 600,000 of these people now. So
I think you said it best, which is that Shopify is the software we ourselves were looking for.
Yeah.
And we kind of scratch our own itch by building this great piece of software. And I think the reason that it was really meaningful and important to us to help these creators, these small businesses, these entrepreneurs, is for a long time, they just didn't have the same tools that the big companies were able to afford.
Yeah.
Or the big companies were able to get. It wasn't affordable, wasn't accessible to them. And in many ways, I think the idea was, what if we gave creators and entrepreneurs the same tools that the biggest companies use, but make it really easy, really simple, really scalable, and super affordable?
Yeah.
What would happen? What if we effectively bent the learning curve for entrepreneurs around the world? What would end up happening? And so it was kind of this, it was obvious for us to always focus on the entrepreneurs. And even today, even though we have merchants that are doing, hundreds of millions of dollars a year, our core focus is still entrepreneurs. And in fact, what's funny is a lot of the big companies that use Shopify today, if you ask them why they use Shopify, they'd say, because we need to be a little more entrepreneurial. And so they are actually now, as opposed to the small guys trying to emulate the big guys are actually trying to emulate the small guys, because entrepreneurs now they've kind of figured it out.
Yeah.
And they're doing really amazing stuff. And so that was always really important to us. And actually, the problem though with small businesses or entrepreneurs is that there is this risk aversion that some have.
Yeah.
And actually, that's the whole point of the Build a Business competition. So the story there is, way back in like 2009, 2010, a mutual friend of ours, Tim Ferriss, and I were talking, and Toby were talking, and we talked about Shopify and where it was going and what was possible. And Tim had this really amazing piece of feedback, which was, Shopify's product is super easy, but most people believe starting a business is either expensive and or complicated. And that if Shopify really wants to be a company that changes the dynamic and really creates more entrepreneurs,
you have a different hurdle.
You got to do something. You got to incentivize that. And the idea was, what if we bribe people to start businesses? And Tim had this crazy idea that we should start this competition where people start a brand new business on Shopify, and the store with the highest sales after 6 months or 8 months would win $100,000. Great idea. The problem is we didn't have $100,000. We had no money. But the cool part was we figured that if we launched it on January 1st, by the time we actually have to pay the winner, which is like June or August or September, we actually may have enough money then. Right?
Find $100,000.
We could probably find enough money over the next 6 or 8 months. And that was it. We launched this Build a Business competition in 2010, and we had like 1,300 people sign up. And the first winner was a company called Dodo Case out of San Francisco, which makes this beautiful moleskin-like iPad case. And what was amazing to us was these are people that may have not started this business if it weren't for this proverbial kick in the butt. Like, start right now, and we're going to incentivize you to do so. And over the course of the next 4 or 5 years or so, the Build a Business competition created tens of thousands of new businesses. And it turned out that giving them $100,000 wasn't good enough anymore, because some of them were building multi-million-dollar businesses.
Yeah, they're like, I don't know if I can go out of my way for that $100K.
Exactly. So what we instead did was we said, okay, well, what if we incentivize them by giving the winners this great experience, like spending an afternoon with you, or going to Richard Branson's island for a week, Necker Island, or spending time with these incredible mentors like Seth Godin and Tina Eisenberg and people that we really deeply respect.
They've all been on the show, by the way.
Have they? That's awesome.
Every person.
That's cool. So it's been this amazing thing, and actually, this is to take it full circle. One of the winners of the year that you participated was a company called MVMT Watches, Movement Watches.
Yeah, Movement. Gorgeous.
Great watches. And Jake and Kramer started this little company in their dorm room, signed up for the Build a Business competition, ended up being one of the winners, got to spend some time with you, and actually they're
Lil
Jon. Exactly. Lil Jon was part of it.
Me, Lil Jon, Gary
Vaynerchuk was there, Tim, Tina
Roth Eisenberg, Selena Banks.
Yeah.
That was a super fun.
It's pretty cool. You actually just saw a Facebook flashback of that whole crew. And actually, last week, Movement sold for $100 million to Movado, one of the largest watch companies. And so that is pretty cool and pretty meaningful. And
that was not long enough for them to sell for $100 million. Right. That was just like they just started.
They just started, right? But actually, that's what's happening right now. Is these brands, the pace of growth and the trajectory of some of these brands that we're seeing start on Shopify are unlike anything that the business world has ever seen. You talk about, on the front page of Forbes, the front cover of Forbes last month, this was Kylie Jenner, who started a little lipstick company on Shopify and now has $1 billion business that she owns 100% by herself. These stories where this entrepreneur are competing with the biggest companies on the planet just really didn't exist 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And,
or 15 years ago.
Or 15 years ago even, that's right. And we're seeing a lot of those today.
It's crazy how fast it seems to have flipped. All right, so a lot of nice things to say about Shopify, a lot of nice things to say about success. The entrepreneurs have found success. But let's go to the other side.
Yep.
Because I think if anybody out there and the folks at home, they know they're largely on their path and they're realizing that, oh man, this is hard. And so give me a couple, I'd like to say, give me the first biggest pain point that you had building Shopify.
So let me take you actually back before that. I talked about a DJ company and I talked about a t-shirt company. What I didn't talk about is the 15 companies in between. And actually, shame on me for not talking about those failures, but actually shame on us as an entrepreneurial community for not talking about our failures. We gravitate to these success stories, these sort of tales of incredible, courage and success. And actually, I think we do a disservice to aspiring entrepreneurs because we sort of glamorize this thing.
Sure.
And it's kind of bullshit,
yeah.
Right? And I need to do a better job of talking about some of those stories. We talk about Shopify growing so big and having all these merchants. We don't talk about the fact that it was really tough for us to raise any money as this little company in Ottawa, Canada. It was
Let's go
really
there,
tough.
because I think a lot of, and first of all, like, you don't have to do it. A lot of the companies that he just talked about, how much had movement watches raised?
Very little.
Couple
Very
hundred
little.
grand.
Yeah, I think
Sold for
it sold for 100 million. I think they raised 500 grand total.
Okay. Yeah, probably from friends and family.
And it was mostly
not
friends
from-
and family. That's
not
right.
Institutional.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, to use Mark Cuban's advice, who's also part of Build a Business, the minute you've raised money, that's your first loss.
Certainly.
Because you should build a business where you don't have to raise money.
Well, it's a promissory note that eventually you're going to pay them back more than what you're taking.
For sure.
And for some businesses, you know, if you know how to spend, if you know how to take $1 and turn it to $1.80, and it's just this marketing machine, I can understand why more dollars equal more $1.80s, and it could make sense. But for most of the stores on Shopify, they're completely self-financed.
Yeah.
But there were some really, really tough times for us over the years, and just to be
the first roadblock. You're like, you need money, can't raise money.
Well, okay, so let's talk about like location, geography. Okay, I know there's sort of this meme right now that business is become geographically agnostic. That is more true today than ever before, but it is certainly easier to raise in certain places than others. Ottawa, Canada, which is the capital of the country, it's a wonderful place, and I'll live there the rest of my life. I really love it. I think it's one of the most underrated cities in North America. But there's no venture community. There isn't this group of angel investors that have made all this money on a previous startup that are now paying it forward.
Yeah.
There was nothing like that. In fact, it was the opposite. It's like DC. There's a lot of people there that work for the government. Yeah. There's a bit of a risk aversion to it. And I think it was really difficult to convince people that actually this is a company worth investing in.
Did you think about moving?
We did. In fact, a couple investors in the early days, particularly Silicon Valley investors, were making their checks conditional on us moving into the Valley. And by that point, like, you know, we liked Ottawa. We liked what was happening there. Our families were there.
Was it hard to walk away from money and the check and the Silicon Valley thing?
Of course it is, because there's this, it's not just the money, it's also the validation that these great iconic investors that write blog posts about whatever want to invest in you, and you want that validation. And in the end, actually what happened was there was this white paper that came out called the 10 Laws of SaaS Businesses, Software as a Service, which is our business model. And we basically memorized this white paper because it gave us the nomenclature that even today we run our business with. And we looked at the front page, and on the front page it said who the author was. And it was a partner of Bessemer Venture Partners, which is a New York City venture fund. And through that, we just reached out to those investors and said, we'd love to talk to you and come up to Canada. And in the end, we actually found a really great investor in there.
Bessemer?
Bessemer, yeah, Bessemer. Bessemer was our first major investor. They led our Series A. But actually, in hindsight, the best thing we ever did was staying in Canada, because in staying in Ottawa, there is something to be said about having a certain focus that I think we wouldn't have had in the Valley. The people that work at Shopify typically work there for a very long time relative to our peers that are in Silicon Valley. So they have great context and stuff. And ultimately, I think it was the right decision. There's something to be said about being the best in your area.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure we would ever have been the best company in Silicon Valley just because we're competing with so many others.
Oh, yeah, and what you're competing with is just crazy. I mean, you guys have had insane, like on par with the Airbnbs and the Ubers, but
there's a lot of them.
Yeah, that's crazy.
There's a lot of them.
There's a lot.
So that was one. I would say the other struggle we really had in the early days was recruiting talent to a place where basically December through March or April, it is really fucking cold. Can I swear on this?
Yes, you
Okay,
can.
all right.
It's frozen.
All right. It's really cold, and we ski, and we have a ski house, and we really we embrace winter.
What's the Canadian? It's like it's not ice if you can't see fish in it.
It's exactly right. Yeah. So it's a difficult place to recruit from, and it was tough to bring people there, and that's gotten easier over time. But also recruiting, and so what we did was we said, okay, well, if we can't recruit people that are highly experienced, what if we just bet on potential? What if we brought on people who were super high potential and just spent a disproportionate amount of time coaching them and training them and mentoring them? And in the end, those are people that still run Shopify today. And so we tried to figure out what we had going for us, which was we had loyalty. We had really smart people that were full of potential. We didn't necessarily have the big rock star names. We didn't have the big VCs in town, but we leveraged what we did have. And I think ultimately it led to a much more, a better company long-term.
Specific pain points. Raising money was hard at first, but what allowed you to break through? Was it that you achieved success? You had numbers that were so tantalizing that they couldn't ignore you anymore? Were you so good that they couldn't ignore you?
I mean, look, having good numbers and good metrics are certainly helpful. I would actually say one of the biggest things we did to bring it back was build a business.
Yeah.
People did not know what Shopify did or who we were. We were not a brand. People that use Shopify knew who we were, but it was really difficult because we're not a consumer brand. We're kind of a brand behind the brand.
Yeah.
So many of the stores all of us shop on today are powered by Shopify without even knowing it. But it was tough for us to tell that story. It was tough for us to convince people to give us a shot. Because we weren't just fighting with getting customers. First, we had to convince someone to try entrepreneurship, which in itself is really difficult.
Yeah.
And then if you're going to try with us. And so I think the Build a Business competition was one of the ways where we sort of crossed the chasm from early adopter to the mainstream.
Yeah.
And I would encourage, and it wasn't gimmicky, at least I didn't think it was gimmicky. Right. It didn't really cost that much money in the short run. But just getting people to know who we were was really, really challenging. I would probably say the third thing was we were told that our market was not big enough, which in hindsight is absolutely ridiculous because I
retail.
think that's right. But at the time when investors were looking at our company and looking at the opportunity, a lot of them felt that it was e-commerce, SaaS business model, physical products. Sort of, if you kind of just look at the Venn diagram, it just was too small for some. And so when enough people tell you that your market is too small, you begin to believe it yourself. And I think to Toby's credit, actually, he just had the vision that no, like in the future, there's going to be way more entrepreneurs and way more aspiring entrepreneurs, and we just have to stay focused. But we made it out of those dark days, and yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that. Like the Jeff Bezos quote, as an entrepreneur, you need to be willing to be deeply misunderstood for a very long time. So how does, in this case, you mentioned Toby, you just said, no, it's good enough. And talk to me about when, because again, if you're listening or watching right now, so many people are saying, well, yeah, my parents told me I couldn't do it. My art teacher, during crit tore me to pieces. I had an online Shopify store and I haven't sold anything, and it's been up there for a year. Like there's a lot of, it's very easy to get discouraged, and part of what this show is about is helping people understand, people at home, that now you have a $15 billion business, but there are plenty of times where people told you sucked, you weren't going to make it wasn't good enough, wasn't fast enough, big enough, all those things.
So first and foremost, like if you love what you're doing, and we absolutely did love what we were doing, it makes it a little bit easier, right? Like our hobby is entrepreneurship. Our business helps entrepreneurs. It was easy to stay the course because we actually really enjoyed what we were doing. But to get a little more specific, part of the issue with entrepreneurship is that it's fairly lonely, particularly if your family doesn't believe in you, your friends don't believe in you, investors not giving you money. And so we were really lucky that both Toby and I had this great peer group. In fact, this is going to sound super cheesy, but we created our own peer group. We called ourselves the Fresh Founders. It's a stupid name, but it was a group of people who every Friday night or so, we would go to a coffee shop in Ottawa, and we would just commiserate with each other. And actually, in hindsight, that little peer group that we cultivated for each other was a huge part of the reason why we were able to persevere through all those dark times. And so no matter what city you're in, there is a way for you to cultivate a bit of a community. And I think that's really, really important. The problem is if you don't seek it out or search for it, it's very difficult to find.
Yeah.
And so,
you've got to make it yourself.
Or you got to make it yourself, right? And also, there's some people don't even want to call themselves an artist or call themselves an entrepreneur. And when you don't self-identify by it, it makes it even more difficult to find like-minded people.
Yeah.
So I would say that was really, really helpful for us in the early days of figuring out, okay, like we need other people that are going through the same thing, because otherwise it's just going to be, we needed more optimism, third-party optimism in our lives. Now, one thing that was also helpful was we used to go to the Valley probably once a quarter, maybe even more often, to do what we would call recharging our batteries, recharging our big vision batteries. And I would say that, if I was in fashion, I'd probably go to Milan or New York City every couple of months to sort of get inspired. If I was creating a car company, I'd probably go to Detroit or wherever to sort of get inspired.
Or LA now.
LA now, exactly. I do believe that it is really helpful to go and take some get out of your own way for a little bit of time, and even if it's sleeping on a buddy's couch in some random city, to go and find people that, number one, you want to emulate, number one, you want to be like, and that was also really, really helpful.
Be close to the scene, whatever the scene is. You don't have to be in it, but you have to tap into it. You can bring that back to wherever you are. I mean, I built my own photography business and creative life out of Seattle, which is neat. Now it's a hotbed for entrepreneurship, but it wasn't 10, 15, 20 years ago.
You were an early adopter of Seattle.
Yeah, exactly. I went into Seattle before it was cool. No, I think that's a really, really salient point, that it's true you don't have to live where all of the scene is, but connecting with it, understanding what's happening, being a part of the culture and the community. Right. I have a philosophy that I call the other 50%, that people think that 50% of that it's making the stuff is 100% of how you are successful. And like, no, it's making it and sharing it. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually saying, actually the making it and sharing it, that's actually only half of the shit. And the other 50% is building community, building mentors, building community around the things that you love. And these are your first customers. These are your beta testers. This is your fresh founders. This is like, if you're not constantly actively building community, like you said, not only is it lonely, but that's very, very hard for entrepreneurs to sort of break through. And I've found that as well. But it's like, there's no peer group. There's no people to give you feedback, because your mom, God bless your mom, but mom does not really know a lot about
your mom can be your mentor.
Right, your mom can't be your mentor.
That's right.
That's the tweet from this episode, right?
But I'll tell you something. You mentioned about making it and sharing it. One of the posters we have up on Shopify that isn't just a sign on the wall, but something we believe is do things and tell people. I think a lot of entrepreneurs spend their time doing things, but actually don't tell anyone about it because of the fear of judgment or failure. I think in 2018, one of the best parts of being a creator and entrepreneur in 2018 is, I think the cost of failure is right now as close to zero as possible. It won't be zero ever, because there's an opportunity cost there for your time.
Sure.
But when you think about, when I think of the greatest stores on Shopify, for example, almost all of them tried 3 or 4 different stores before landing on the one that actually worked really, really well. And that one that worked well was way better than the other stores as well. Yeah. That opportunity to try a bunch of things that wasn't available to our parents or grandparents. Sure. They had to mortgage their entire lives in order to start a business that may have failed. Yeah. I think that is really, really important. The other piece of it is that I agree, sort of creating, I used to send out more emails than I care to remember to people just asking for advice. I mean, that's originally how all these mentors for Build a Business, from Richard Branson to Mark Cuban to Chase Jarvis, like the reason that we got these people was I just actually cold emailed most of you. Yeah. And I called you and I said, and I got one of you in, and so I asked one of you to actually introduce me to another one of you, and I kind of I outworked everyone else to develop this thing. And then once one of you agreed, I made sure that your experience was just incredible, awesome. Right? Yeah, every aspect of it needed to be fantastic, because you guys were then my tool to get other people to come and do it. And so I think it's actually never been more exciting or interesting of a time to be an artist or a creator or an entrepreneur than it is right now. I think a lot of the reason is there's less baggage around it. There's less cost to it. There's more competition because a lot of people are trying it now, but I think there's something really special right now in sort of the way things are happening around entrepreneurs who are starting in their basement and building companies that are beating the crap out of hegemonic Fortune 500s, which frankly, I love.
I love it. I love it too. And I think that's part of, well, you just said something I want to touch on for a second. So you listed a bunch of attributes, and it's true. It is the best time because of the tools, because of, I guess, availability of resources. It's more accepted. It's culturally, we don't have the same stigma that our parents, our grandparents had to go through to mortgage the house to get but the ability to test and learn and poke the audience and say if they like it or not, it's instant. Mm-hmm. It's like you put something out and in 15 minutes if you're a photographer, if people liked your photograph. And that cuts both ways, but I think there's a little bit of potentially a short-term win, but a long-term loss. How do you keep people focused on the things that they are supposed to be on this planet to do? And because it is so easy to test, to not just run around willy-nilly. Because I believe deeply in stamina. Like most successes come right after it is absolutely as dark as it can get. That's when something changes. So how do you, in an area where you can build a store and start a business literally tomorrow on Shopify, what advice would you give for people not to chase their tail and just do whatever they feel like?
So I've been thinking about this idea of life's work for a long time. That if humans are going to live longer than ever, what is going to change? And I think one of the main things that's going to change is that for older generations, from my parents and my grandparents and great-grandparents, this concept of life's work was just not accessible to them. My grandfather would say, it's very nice that you're passionate about what you're doing, but I had to put food on the table and a roof over my head.
Yeah.
And my dad kind of had to put a better roof over my head and a little bit better food on the table.
Yeah.
But I think...
college.
That's right, exactly. So for me, though, it's a luxury that I get to think about this idea of, can I do my life's work throughout my entire life?
Yeah.
I also think that there are so many people who have these hobbies where they go home from their 9-to-5 job that they absolutely hate, and they tinker in their workshop or in their basement, or they make little, this cool bracelets at their mom's kitchen table. And I would really encourage everyone that has a hobby to explore that hobby and sort of double click on it just a little bit. I don't mean go quit your job full time, because frankly, we have responsibilities and everyone has different things they have to sort of worry about and frankly, they have to afford. But there is a particular time when we all get this instinct, which is like, all right, I think I'm ready. I think I'm ready to quit my day job and do the thing I actually love doing. And I think that is a really critical juncture. And I think not saying it's for everyone, but for some people, I think that's when they actually decide, you know what, this 9-to-5 thing got me here, but it's now time for me to actually do my life's work. One, I think they're going to be happier longer term, but two, I think you could have a much bigger impact, not just financially, but also when I was a lawyer for all of 10 months. Okay, I hated it.
I didn't know this.
Yeah, I went to law school.
I think we've been friends for longer than 5 years. I'm going to call it 10. It's not often you know someone for 10 years and you don't know that they were a lawyer.
I was a lawyer for all of 10 months. And every Sunday night, I would get this pit in my stomach because Monday morning was coming. And I hated going to work. I hated being a lawyer. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I told my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, I said, whatever I do next, I want my Sunday night to feel like my Friday night. And if that happens, I'm good. No matter, that is all I actually want to do. And 10 years, that was 10 years ago, my Sunday night feels like my Friday night. My Monday morning feels like my Saturday morning. And that, I think, is something really special. I don't think that's unique to me. I think that that's what happens when you find your life's work.
Yeah.
And again, not everyone can just quit their job and go pursue whatever that passion is, but there is a point where you have to make that choice. And I think if you risk it and you mitigate the risk, so you're not mortgaging your house and putting your family in a state of peril, but you're calculating that risk. For most of us, that is the right time to jump. And if you do, you get to do really cool shit.
Forever.
And make money at it, make people happy and contribute to the world. And fuck, I don't know anything better than that. And so that is something that I feel very fortunate that I can do. And as much as possible, I'm trying to help other people find that same thing.
All right, let's think about there's a cross-section of people that don't have the luxuries that we just talked about. I'm constantly trying to remind myself that I was born white, I was born male, I was born in the United States of America in what year? Whatever year it was.
A long time ago.
Yeah. And all of those things gave me a catapult.
And you were born on third base.
I was born on third base.
So was I.
And still lower middle class. I mean, I had upside down Nikes, Adidas with 4 stripes.
Yeah.
I didn't know I had
those are collector's editions, right?
I didn't know I had Nikes with 2 eyes until I was in 4th grade. I was like, wait a minute, my Nikes have upside down. Anyway, but there is an entire cross section of the world that does not have the luxuries that we are afforded. Yet there is an emerging opportunity with put internet plus, let's talk about Shopify in particular. What are you seeing? Where are markets growing quickly? And what do you feel like, what is something that we can do to minimize that gap for that cross-section of the world?
So I spent some time in the last couple of years. We have a small office in Bangalore in India. And I got a chance to go down there probably 5 or 6 years ago for the first time, and I've been going back almost on an annual basis. And what's amazing is 95%, I believe, maybe it's 90% of people living in India self-describe themselves as small business owners. They don't call themselves entrepreneurs, but small business owners. And so you would think that inherently entrepreneurship would be something baked into the culture.
Yeah.
And it is, but in a very different way. And what's interesting is that when we go to places like India, or we go to places that are more sort of on the developing side of the world, what we see is way more creativity because capital is non-existent.
Yeah.
So they don't have money to spend on AdWords or Instagram ads or Facebook ads, but what they do have is they're willing to just outwork everybody else. And I actually think it's that work ethic that has made India and actually some of these other developing countries just incredible from an economy perspective. We've never seen growth like this.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do now is we're trying to make it even easier for them. So for example, in India, there's credit card penetration is just not as high as it is in North America.
Yeah.
So in order for us to be successful there, we have to figure out alternative payment types, whether it's using something like Paytm or it's cash and delivery. But there are sort of these nuances that we have to work there. But there is one common denominator that everyone in all these countries wants to improve their life. They want to be, they want to go, they want to be in a better position than the previous generation. And actually, I think that gives them a ton of advantage over many of us that were born on third base. Because, I mean, I've been supporting myself since I was a kid, and so, but I still was born in North America as a white male. But frankly, I didn't necessarily have the same, I didn't need to have the same work ethic as a lot of them had to have. Yeah. And I think actually that gives them a huge advantage. And it's the reason why we're seeing entrepreneurship explode in places like China and India and South America.
Yeah.
Now, what will be interesting is where does North America, who frankly we're all on third base, where do we sit in the next 10 or 20 years from now?
Yeah.
We use, most people in North America work 9 to 5, 5 days a week. In China, they use an expression called 996, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. They are willing to outwork other countries, other people, other cultures. And so when I'm meeting with entrepreneurs there, I'm actually far more inspired in many cases than I am when I meet entrepreneurs elsewhere, because they simply have no choice and they're just going to outwork everyone. That is really inspiring to me. It's the one
variable that you can choose. Right, is how hard you work.
That's exactly right. And you don't depend on your relationships or some sort of safety net. You have no choice.
Yeah.
And I think that gives them a huge advantage as an entrepreneur or even a creator of sorts. Now, I think if the best entrepreneurs I know, no matter where they live, they take the resources that they have available to them and they combine that with just this ability to outwork the rest. I was never the smartest person in any of my classes, in any of the businesses. I just tried to work harder than other people. And this idea of working smart versus working hard, I wasn't even aware of that at that point. I was just working hard. Now I'm able to sort of figure out how is my time best spent. But I do believe that we are living in a time where you can start a little tea company out of, Delhi, and it may be the biggest tea company on the planet in a couple of years. And that was not possible even 5 or 10 years ago.
Let's bridge from the opportunities or lack thereof in the emerging markets and talk about trends for a second. So retail is obviously experiencing massive disruption. Nike's now, they don't have this distribution model. Now Nike is selling their own stuff and they're trying to figure it out. And you look at Apple with Today at Apple, completely transforming what it feels like to walk in a store. No one's trying to sell you something. They're trying to get you to sit down and learn. Like, these are completely transformational, seismic shifts in the retail world. We're here in New York right now. I don't know if you can hear any background noise, but again, coming in from the airport, I was like, God, there's so much retail. It's just blocks and blocks and these. Everyone has huge flagship stores here. You have to be super tuned in to retail trends.
Yeah.
because you're in the business of transforming it. So give us a little preview on what's happening. And you talked about physical and digital. I'm sure you can cut it on a couple different axes, but just talk to me about where is it going?
I think there's a bit of a meme going around that like retail is struggling, retail is dead, and I call bullshit on all that. I think actually this is one of the most exciting times of retail since John Wanamaker created Wanamaker's department store in Philly in 1876. That was sort of the first time where you sort of had a modern retail shop, a bunch of brands under one roof. That was actually the first store in America, Wanamaker's, that had electricity and had a telephone.
Wow.
And that was, at the time, that was super exciting. But I think over the last 130 years or so, you've seen a lot of the same thing just kind of modernized. You've seen bigger malls, more lights, movie theaters in malls. But it's been a lot of the same thing. And I actually think for the first time in a very long time now, I'm really excited about retail again. I think there's some really cool things happening. So one is this idea that a maker can create something and can actually sell it or give it directly to the person that's consuming it, the end consumer. That is amazing.
Yeah.
This idea of direct to consumer, I don't believe is a trend. I think that is the way retail always should have been. And the reason it wasn't like that was because distribution was too difficult.
Yeah, because you lived in a shack in Pennsylvania.
Exactly, you had no choice.
Right, there was not enough people who lived near you to sell your stuff.
Right, and so your only choice was to go to give it to some large company, to fly to Bentonville, Arkansas, and convince a retail buyer at Walmart to please put it on their shelves, take a big cut of the margin, and probably not know how to sell it properly. And the fact today that all of us that create things or curate things can actually go direct to consumer, I think is amazing. So one, consumer usually pays less money. Two, the maker makes more money. And three, the experience is so much better.
Yeah.
When I buy a boosted board, which is the motorized skateboard that I ride most days in the summertime, and I buy it from boostedboard.com, I get a little chat box that pops up in the right-hand corner, and I can ask any questions I want, the range, the weight, can I take it on airplanes and get this amazing information right away.
Yeah.
But if I went to go buy it at a Best Buy, for example, some sales guy would have no idea what the answer to any of these questions. I think as a consumer, direct to consumer is so much better. I also think this idea that when I was younger, I used to go to concerts, for example. If I wanted to support the artist that I was seeing, let's say it was a musician, I'd go to the merch stand, and I'd buy some crappy Gildan t-shirt with the tour dates on the back. Yeah. Whereas now, when I go to a concert, when I go to a Drake show, I see the most amazing winter coat, co-branded with Drake's brand and Canada Goose. And so that's telling me that I think I think a lot of these celebrities are actually creating really great brands that are not promotional brands, but truly are a way for their fans and the people that care about them to engage with them on a more deeper level. I think a lot about Kylie, right? Kylie Jenner, who's created this $1 billion brand. She owns 100% of it on her own, and she's selling this amazing lipstick on Shopify. I think when I compare her to like Michael Jordan, for example, who I think created this amazing brand as well with Jordan brand, but he doesn't actually own it. Nike owns his brand, right? And I think if Michael Jordan was starting today, what you would see is you'd see him owning his brand. You'd see Nike as a supply partner. That's what you have with Kanye, for example, with Adidas. Yeah. And so I think one of the other trends that I think is really exciting is seeing more of these people, celebrities, artists, rappers, professional athletes, figure out what their brand is and then create really great products around it. Yeah. Not promotional products, but truly great stuff. Not tchotchkes, but actually great stuff. That's the second thing I'm seeing. And probably the third and most important retail trend that I'm seeing is I think the future of retail is just going to be wherever shoppers want to buy. And if you want to sell to you and I, better have a great online store experience, maybe also have a really good physical store experience. Yep. If you want to sell to my sister, you better be selling something like Snapchat or Instagram or Facebook because that's where she wants to buy. And my mom and dad still love walking into a brick and mortar store. Yeah. I don't believe those are different businesses. I think that's all part of retail. And I think the retailers and the merchants and the makers in the future that are going to be really successful are going to have a really deep understanding of what their customers want and how they want to purchase. And so I think that's pretty amazing. I also think the fact that you have these these niche brands, many of them are on Shopify, who are building things that are just amazing and then selling them to the consumer. And going back to that example I said earlier, and actually taking a big chunk out of these big emotionless companies and actually beating them at their own game, that's super inspiring.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, again, it's a little bit about trend, but it's, you all see the money that flows through your pipelines and what sectors it comes from. And so a little bit of backstory and context for the folks at home. So I had an amazing time as a build a business mentor. It was myself, Cuban, Ferris, Lil Jon, Gary V, Tina Roth Eisenberg, Salida Ebanks.
You're missing someone, but I forget. It's basically, it was basically Chase and a bunch of other guys.
Damon.
Damon John.
Yeah, Damon.
Yeah.
And we each mentored a different sector. So, and we get to, give your money away to them when they won, and then agree to be their mentor for a year, or 6 months or something like that. It was really cool. And I know relative to some of the other businesses, my photography and imaging, the people they made a ton of money, but it wasn't like what some other genre of maker made. So just talk to us a little bit about like who's making a lot, where are their great margins. And again, I don't advocate that you build your business on these principles unless you are an MBA who's looking to jump on board and operate a company. If you're a creator and a founder, I think you should do something that you love first and foremost, and then hopefully you can create some good unit economics. But I'm just fascinated to know a little bit about these trends, and I don't want to read your public filings. I want you to tell me about it.
So a couple things. First of all, I think the ones that sort of stand out for me are the ones that, as you said, had a deep passion for what they were doing.
Yeah.
They weren't selling widgets.
Yeah.
They were selling something that they themselves really loved. I would also say a lot of them, before they actually went all in, they kind of tiptoed into the water a little bit. So you may have someone that has like a soccer blog, and it's a cool blog and people reading it and they're like, you know what, maybe I can sell soccer balls or soccer products. They didn't necessarily go out and buy 1,000 soccer balls and store inventory. They may have started with, a drop shipping business. Okay. Let me see whether or not, again, you're not gonna make that much money in a drop shipping business because the margins are lower, but they experiment to figure out whether or not they had a product market fit. Okay. And once they did, then they doubled down and said, all right, it's time to buy inventory. I would also say the ones that succeeded and have continued to succeed over a very long period of time, there was a real story behind what they were doing. And this idea of storytelling, as cliche as I might say, it really does work really well because one, you're able to, particularly the early purchasers of your product end up becoming your ambassadors, almost your marketing team. Yeah. And I think if you don't necessarily have a compelling story and you don't really, you don't have this narrative of why you've done it and how you've done it, I don't actually think it works nearly as well. Probably the last thing that I think has been a common thread across all the winners of Build a Business, but frankly, most of the Shopify success stories over time, is that they really did fill a gap in the market. Whether it was Debbie Sterling who created Goldilocks because she felt there were no toys to inspire little girls to become engineers, and she was one of very few female engineers in her class, or it's Tina, who before she became a mentor created Tattly because she realized that her daughter Ella was coming home with a bunch of crappy temporary tattoos on her arm, and she's like, why can't there be really nice looking tattoos?
Mama can make better.
That's right. Or even Dodo Case, who said, like, why can't I make a beautiful looking iPad case that almost looks like an artisanal book, right? And I think that those are some of the common. Beyond that, though, we have merchants that sell crazy things like boosted boards, which has a lot of R&D behind it. We also have merchants that sell one single t-shirt, and that's all they do. So wouldn't necessarily there's one particular type. I think actually today, it's end of summer 2018 right now, a lot of them, rather than spending money on digital ads, upfront paid ads, a lot of them are actually first finding a community online, whether it's on Reddit or Instagram or some random forum. They are evangelizing an existing community in advance of actually going to market with it. Yeah. And so that when they hit that launch button, they already have people that are kind of interested in seeing where they go. And that's again where capital is no longer the most important ingredient for success. It's really creativity and resourcefulness, and I think community and getting these people engaged. And it's not easy to do that, but it's not impossible. And it doesn't matter who you are.
Probably easier than raising
way easier than raising money. And by the way, it doesn't matter where you're based. If you're based in Seattle, you're based in Bangalore, you can create and work with a community and add value to that community. We were talking earlier just about one of my favorite stores on Shopify, which is Fashion Nova. It's an incredible story out of Los Angeles. Great entrepreneur named Richard. But Richard has been sending free clothing to up and coming musicians for as long as Fashion Nova has existed, knowing that at some point one of them may actually become the next big thing. And in this case, it was Cardi B.
Yeah.
And while everyone else now is trying to get Cardi B engaged in their brand because she's this huge celebrity, this huge brand, she's loyal to Fashion Nova because Fashion Nova believed in her before anyone else did. And yes, it cost him a little bit of money because he sent them free stuff, her free stuff, but that's really what it takes. I think he didn't have a lot of money, he didn't have many connections, but he was willing to place some bets.
All right, this just satisfies a weird place, and I think people's minds out there right now are something like, what is like the weirdest thing that people like? You get any weird stories of people like making a ton, and you probably can't disclose how much they made unless you've had to get there. Yeah, but is there anybody who's made a ton of money selling someone something totally bizarre?
Well, every now and then I'll catch like a trend. For example, like I'll see a fidget spinner, shop and stuff. So we see some of those weird stores. I mean, the interesting part is on the internet, every niche has an actual mass market. I think that's sort of the beauty of digital commerce is that
Say that again.
Every niche has a mass market. So you may think it's a small niche. You may think it's something that only you and your quirky friends care about. But the crazy part is online, you can actually curate that and bring these people together, and you can take a bunch of people that care about the small niche and actually have a real market for it. That I think is really great. I can't think of any ones that come to mind. Although frankly, I've been wearing, it's maybe not a weird one, but I've been wearing the Chubbies, the short company.
No.
I've been wearing those shorts like all throughout the summer, and they're kind of shorts kind of thing. And I never kind of thought I'd wear shorts that kind of go up to here, but they're amazing. And actually, it was my parents' anniversary 2 weeks ago, and my dad snores horribly. And I was like, I want to get them something to help with my dad snoring because I think it'll help my parents' marriage. And I got them, it's a Shopify store called Nora, N-O-R-A. It's this thing that goes on my dad's pillow, and every time he snores, it kind of adjusts his pillow just a little bit. And I don't think my father's sleeping much, but he's not snoring anymore either. So I think that's
super happy.
My mom's super happy. But that's the cool part of my perspective watching these hundreds and hundreds of thousands of stores on Shopify is that I know a lot of their origin stories, and all of them had doubt, and all of them had insecurity, and all of them weren't sure what they were going to make it. And it's amazing to me to watch all of them sell what's now I think more than $60 billion worth of products on Shopify. And it's not these big stores, it's the long tail. It's it's all these hundreds of thousands of stores that
that's the punchline here. I mean, the fact that you started the business is cool. I respect the hell out of you for building this insane business. But to me, like these are messages for you, for the people who are listening and watching right now. Like you have to, if you've ever wondered if this stuff is actually happening, like you are definitely gonna make no money if you don't start a store. Yeah. Or you're definitely, if you don't go into business, if you don't print business cards, if you don't, maybe less relevant now, but if you don't start saying who you are, what you believe in, and putting it out there for people to participate in, to judge, to collaborate with, to build community around, certainly nothing's gonna happen. So you have that, like these are stories of entrepreneurs who've put it out there, and you don't have to, not everybody is going to be a Movement Watches that sells for 100 million.
And you don't have to be, right?
Right.
I mean, for some of the merchants on our platform, they're just trying to make a living, right? They didn't want to work at some crappy job they didn't like where they had no passion. They wanted to find their life's work. And the fact that they can support themselves and their family, that is amazing.
It's amazing.
And frankly, like what technology has done, forget Shopify for a second, what tech has done is it truly has reduced the barrier for all of us to at least give our crazy ideas a shot. it's $29. It's like a couple lattes a month at a Starbucks, right?
Yeah.
For that same amount of money, you can actually see whether or not your crazy idea has legs. And I think that is worthwhile. I think it's a worthwhile bet to take on yourself.
We're gonna pivot here. So I'm gonna pivot towards, right now there are people who are trying to build companies and who are not yet to where you are with the company that you've built, and they're trying to figure it out. And we were joking earlier when, 5 or 10 years ago when we first started hanging out, you had 60 people, and now you have 4,000. Okay, everyone says like, that's cool. I remember when Creative Live grew from 6 to 80 in 18 months. Everyone's like, oh my God, this is crazy. And everyone will pat you on the back on the outside, on the inside it was total chaos.
For sure.
And because the person who's only worked here for 4 weeks is hiring the new person, and how do the core values get passed along? And there's like all kinds of problems with that. Growing from 60 to 4,000 in a handful of years is bonkers. Yeah. How do you keep your company culture alive?
Yeah. So there's this concept, or this I don't know what it is, philosophy is called Dunbar's number. Mm-hmm. It's 150. Mm-hmm. So I think effectively, biologically, humans can keep 150 names or people in their head at any one given time. And so I knew about that concept. I think Seth Godin writes about this a little bit, but it actually wasn't like 100 to 150 that was tougher. It was actually, it was almost like going from 30 to 60 that was the most difficult for us, for me.
Yeah.
And the reason is Shopify is deeply personal for me. This is not just my business or my job, but it's my life. It's everything to me. And I really took a lot of pride in knowing everyone at the company, not just knowing about who they were, but knowing who their family was and what they were up to.
Their dog's name.
Exactly. Yeah. And tell me, like, I wanted to know their stories. And it became really difficult when we hit 60 people. So we sort of created something, a couple things in the early days that I think have lasted and have scaled to 4,000. So one is, we do an AMA at least once a month, where the entire company can ask any questions they want using their name or anonymously. And using a very simple Reddit-style upvote, downvote system, we answer the first 10 or 20 questions. So it really has allowed for, it's almost like a pressure valve release, that whatever people are wondering about, it's a vehicle for them to ask. So there's no sacred cows, there's no things that, like, if there's something that people are concerned about, that is really helpful. That's one. The second thing we've done is the company is structured in a way where we are highly aligned but loosely coupled. And so what I mean by that is the company as a whole knows what direction we want to go, and every group knows where they're going. But there's very little, there's as little interdependency as possible on other teams, which the result of which is that one team is not blaming another team for not being able to get their work done.
Yeah.
In the same ways that we give our partners APIs to build apps and themes and all types of stuff on top of, we ourselves use APIs inside of Shopify from a technical perspective, but also from a philosophical perspective, which is that one business team can work with another business team by effectively using like a sort of a business API.
Yeah.
And so that also is really, really helpful. Third is, we've been really clear about our values. And I think a lot of people think your values are, or your culture is what you put on the wall. Right. And we've always sort of felt that our values or our culture, I think your culture is what people do when no one else is looking, when no one's looking. What does your staff, your team, your employees do when they're left to their own devices? That's what defines your culture. And so we've over-invested in that as much as we possibly can. So much so that now Toby and I have an internal podcast called Context. It comes out every 2 weeks. It's only for our staff. But all it does is we take one topic and we just give the context of the history of it, why we made that decision. And so now when new people join Shopify, they're able to get up to speed almost like an archaeologist super rapidly.
They listen to it on 2x, 1.5x.
I don't think they can do that with me on 2x, maybe with Toby, but I already speak pretty fast. We also, we default to open. So a lot of companies talk about transparency. We really do default to open. So every quarter we have a board meeting. And what we tell the board in that meeting, we also submit it to the entire company. We believe that's really, really important.
Yep.
So I don't think we do it perfectly, but there are some scaffolding and there's a foundation of culture at Shopify that I think has been able to withstand the growth. And actually now, I think what we're left with is a company that with every new hire, the average of the company actually gets better. So I don't think we have it perfect, but I think we're really honest with each other and honest about what works and what doesn't. And we spend time on that stuff. It really matters. And putting posters on your wall that says whatever
attitude,
bullshit, total bullshit. If that's not what you're living, if that's not what you are setting an example of, it doesn't matter what you put on your walls.
All right. So we've talked. It's a lot of our stories. They are designed for you to help us as creators and entrepreneurs understand what the hundreds of thousands of creators and entrepreneurs that are on your platform are doing. Let's talk about you specifically, Harley Human. What's your biggest leadership challenge going from 60 to 4,000?
I got a lot, but probably my biggest one is I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, and I've become quite accustomed to doing everything on my own. Not because I'm better, but because for a long time, no one really wanted to help me.
Yeah.
And so with the t-shirt business, I was the janitor and the receptionist and the head of sales and the CEO and the manufacturer and everything because no one else would help me. That transition to letting go and not doing everything myself and not micromanaging, that has been super challenging for me. I'm still not good at it, and I've been seeing a coach now for basically since day one when I arrived at Shopify. But that has not been an easy transition. And so one of the concepts that has been really helpful for me on the way we use at Shopify is the idea of a trust battery. So the metaphor kind of works like this. Everybody that I work with and we all work with, they start at about a 50% trust battery. And their goal is to get to 100% trust as fast as they can. And the way they get there is by making good decisions in the face of ambiguity. And when they get to 100%, that's kind of what they want because that's where you get autonomy. I trust them, they can run on their own autonomously, and better for us, better for me, better for them, better for the company. And I don't necessarily say you're at 88% or 82%, but we can kind of figure out directionally how things are going. But the reverse is also true. If they make a lot of bad decisions, eventually the trust battery does deplete. And like an old cell phone that you have in your drawer, there is a point where the trust battery cannot be recharged again. It's just so depleted that no matter how many times you plug it in, it's not going anywhere. And so we're really honest about sort of this trust battery analogy, and I'm really honest about it with my team. And I say, look, like this is going in a really bad direction. You need to know that. I'm going to probably be a lot more involved now because this idea of trust but verify is now requiring me to verify a lot more than I'm trusting.
Yeah. It's a Peter Drucker.
Yeah, thing, right? I think it was Drucker. A couple people sort of told me in it, but that has been
the trust battery. I've never heard that, but it's like the trust but verify kind of thing.
That I think is really important. But that's probably my biggest challenge. The second challenge that I have is my job changes a lot. Now Shopify is a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company with a lot of people, a lot of different stakeholders, and I feel like I have to requalify for my job every year. And that is really difficult because my job gets more and more difficult every single year. And I've actually found it's been challenging to find people to learn from as you grow, and whether it's, I don't have that many peers that are running public companies. Most of my friends are running companies that are private, and so I have to find new mentors and new advisors. But it's been challenging to. My job doesn't get easier over time. I actually find it gets a lot more challenging. I think it's what keeps me interested. That's what keeps it compelling and keeps it being my life's work.
Advice for someone who's thinking of starting but is afraid.
Advice for someone who's thinking of starting but is afraid. Well, first and foremost, know that all of us are afraid. I'm still afraid. I still lose sleep all the time. Because now I actually feel like, my God, I have the.
It was like you needed to get successful. Now that you have success, you got to keep it. You got to.
I was like, now actually, like I better keep doing this, and I better get better, and I better get faster, and I better get smarter, and I have less excuses for why we're not going to build a $100 billion company that affects the lives of millions of entrepreneurs. So first and foremost, I think it's important to realize that all of us are scared. No one has their shit figured out. Some of us tend to put on a bit of a a tougher smile or put up this sort of shell on top that makes you feel like, well, they must have their stuff figured out. And actually over time I realized that the best people are actually fairly self-aware and self-critical and honest with each other to say, I actually don't know what I'm doing. The second thing I would say is, if you have this idea that you have been toying with for a little while, write it down. And every time you think about it, put a check next to it. And if you think about it over the course of a month or two, and there are 10 checks next to that idea, give it a try. Don't necessarily go all in. Start a little store, take a weekend stall at a farmer's market, go create something that, maybe take a 2-day weekend and go and immerse yourself in it. Go to a hackathon or an accelerator program for a couple days, but give that idea the respect that it obviously deserves if it's taken on that much mind share. And if it only has one checkbox after 2 or 3 or 4 weeks or months, cross it off and move on from there. But this idea that you're in this constant state of limbo and uncertainty, I think that is the worst thing for an entrepreneur or creator. Not all the time, but sometimes the wrong decision is better than indecision. And it's not always the case, but in the case of trying something, particularly now that the cost of failure is getting to be so low, I don't know, you may just figure out what your life's work is. And that's amazing.
It's been so fun watching you. I remember sitting at a campfire with you and Toby.
In Lake Tahoe.
In Lake Tahoe.
Yeah.
And you were scheming to build a new widget of something. And then the next time I looked around, you guys were 10 times bigger. And the next time I looked around, you were worth $1 billion. And then you went public. And it's just been so fun to watch you grow this from the grassroots in Canada.
Not bad, yeah. In Canada of all places. I mean, yeah. And also Canadians in general, it's tough to kind of celebrate success in Canada. We're a very
well done.
Yeah, but it's just a little bit more modest and a little more low key. But actually, I'm really proud that we did this whole thing in Canada.
That's the punchline here, man. I'm so proud.
But it's well, thank you for saying that. And actually, one of the greatest parts about knowing you, Chase, and some of our mutual friends is that surrounding yourself with other people that are equally as ambitious and equally as positive. And getting rid of all the energy vampires in your life. And frankly, that meant for me getting rid of some people that were very close to me, family even, because they just didn't simply add to what I wanted, and they weren't necessarily making me better, and they were making me doubt myself in ways that I just couldn't afford. But surrounding myself with really great, positive people who are also on their own journey to find their life's work, that's been really important too.
There's no substitute for that.
Thanks for having me, man.
So happy to have you on the show. That's it. Signing off for another episode. We'll see you again, hopefully, tomorrow.